21, symbol rate 30 000, polarité horizontale. Le satellite Amos 15, position 15 degrés est, fréquence 12 333, symbol rate 30 000, polarité verticale. For You Télévision est également disponible sur les bouquets créés au Linktree Star Times, sur nos différentes plateformes numériques et sur l'application For You Media, téléchargeable sur Play Store. En bonus, profitez de la pertinence de nos sujets d'actualité et de l'interactivité de toutes nos émissions. Participez par appel WhatsApp au +237 693 589 668. Sur Skype, For You TV. For You Télévision, votre nouvelle chaîne panafricaine qui vous offre une autre vision du monde.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Education is defined as the activity of teaching or educating people in schools, colleges, universities, or different methods of arrangement. When education system in different countries are threatened or its values is not being recognized, we begin asking ourselves the questions: how effective are our education systems across the continent? From time immemorial, from Zimbabwe to Kenya, Uganda, most of the education systems have been threatened across the African continent. This is Voice It. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to today's edition of Voice It over your Pan-African media, For You Media. Of course, today on the menu, we shall be discussing, uncovering, why not underscoring how effective education systems are on the African continent. And before we join our guest who is joining us all the way from the United States of America this afternoon, who is Dr. Nyaka Lagoke, I would like you to take a listen to this report compiled to us by Moni Manu.
Engaged in the enterprise and activity of acquiring education as evidenced by the existence of the University of Timbuktu long before Africa and its people came under imperial subjugation and rule. The acquisition of education by the people of Africa is the light that penetrated and dispelled the pall of darkness that once enveloped Africa. Educated people helped to put a stop to some obnoxious, vile and inhumane cultural practices such as the killing of twins, and many people who attended schools built by white people secured employment in the civil service and contributed their quota to the development of their countries. In the 1960s and the 1970s, the post-primary schools and universities in Africa offered quality education to students, and good morals were inculcated into them. However, sadly, with time, the excellence that was associated with African schools was eroded. The diminution of the educational standard in Africa was partly caused by the military intervention in politics. Military rulers' enactments of draconian laws to muzzle voices of dissent in the polity compelled leading intellectuals to leave Africa. Countries like Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe have had teachers strike because of no salary payment. Recently in Cameroon, there was the OTS movement by teachers who were on the streets because they were fed up with their poor working conditions. What have the governments of these countries done to change this present status quo? However, there is a silver lining in the dark clouds as to the issues affecting the educational system in Africa, with the recent ratification of government policies aimed at improving the living conditions of teachers in post-primary schools and revamping the school system. Therefore, to strengthen education systems for sustainable development in Africa, there is need to improve equity, equality, and relevance. Education in Africa highlights 5 top priorities for the remaining 8 years of the Education 2030 agenda, beyond which is from demographics, financing, inclusion, quality to employment. When these measures are implemented, they will reduce the financial difficulties which teachers suffer and boost their morale, thus revamping the educational system in Africa.
That was a detailed in-depth compared to us by Moni Manu. As we earlier told you, today we're discussing how effective are educational systems on the African continent. Like I did mention, our guest is joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. He is Dr. Nyakala Goke, the Associate Professor of History and Pan-African Studies there in U.S. Good day, sir. Welcome to today's edition.
I just want to rectify that I'm not associate professor yet, so I just want to rectify that.
Okay, thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. Okay, right down to the matter on our table this evening. What evaluation do you make of the educational systems on the African continent?
Oh, yes, it's a very difficult question because we may tempt it, to have one opinion about the educational system, about the educational system in Africa, and then I listened to the report, a beautiful one. I know that the quality of education compared to those of our parents, of course, is going down, but we can see some resilience on the continent. We saw that in some parts of Africa, many people still value education, and then youngsters want to be able to perform and achieve. And then we can see also some difficulties on the cultural aspect. In many regions in Africa, people do not want women to go to school because of some beliefs that in some parts of Africa, if a woman goes to school and she becomes successful, that success and wealth are not going to be for a family, but for the family of the person she is going to marry. So we have all those elements, but I think that things are going in the right direction. But we need to have a very, very strong revolution. To quote Dr. King, who spoke about the necessity of a radical revolution of values. So we need to have a paradigm shift in the way we conceive the educational system. And I think that during the show, I will have time, to talk about those elements.
Okay, so you have experienced education out of the country, you've experienced education out of your homeland. How would you agree that education systems on the African continent are still colonial?
Oh yeah, still colonial. Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Very beautiful question. On this, even though we cannot say that it is like almost everywhere in Africa, we people, citizens of francophone African countries that speak French, and then many other countries, even where people speak English, we are living in what Kwame Nkrumah called neo-colonial states. And so what is a neo-colonial state? A neo-colonial state is a state that is considered free, but whose policy, economic and political, and then are designed and devised by foreigners or foreign entities. And when we apply that to the educational system, we have the same thing. In Africa, one of the biggest problems that we have, going to school, we learn things about Voltaire, Victor Hugo, all those great European thinkers, and many of them racist, but we don't even question some of the things that we were learning. And then it is when you are growing up, when you become mature, then through your personal learning experience, and you discover that those elements were sustaining through the writings, not all of them, but some of them, or a good number of them, were sustaining that imperialistic European agenda. So in my country, Ivory Coast, we never studied Pan-Africanism when I was going to school. I can see that never. There was no course on Pan-Africanism, and then even today it is still a peripheral conversation, and it is the same thing in many African countries. And then we want to be able to read and to study about African heroes. We don't know much about people like Nyombe or Felix Mumie. We don't know much about Modibo Keita in Mali. So these are things that we don't study. Sheikh Anta Diop from Senegal, who spoke about the negritude of the ancient Egyptian civilization, is not taught in many African schools. This is one of the biggest problems that we have. And for us to be able to rectify that, we need a radical revolution of values. We need a change of paradigm, and we need to think about an Afrocentric educational system so that we can learn things about Africa, the people of African descent, and so that we can try it and rectify what the colonizers have done and what those who came after them have done. And then that's something that we need to rectify, and that should be one of the biggest revolutions we should be working on.
Okay, Dr. Nyaka, in your opinion, what do you think is actually wrong with our education systems?
We have so like anyway. So I've already spoken about the fact that we study. It is an extraverted educational system. We study theories, concepts, political figures, scientists that are known, but who have done great things in the world, but they were working for the promotion of the European agenda. That is one of the problems that we have. The second problem that we have is that those who are in charge of the educational system prefer to put the money in order to pay the salaries, and then the money that is supposed to be invested, like in research, in inventiveness, in technology, we don't see the money allocated the way it should in order to promote research. That is the second problem that we have in Africa. The third problem that we have in Africa, when you talk about the educational system, is that those who are in charge of the educational system in Africa do not think about how education has to adapt according to the evolutions of things in the world. I'm going to explain it. Today, we like in the experiencing what we call the information technology revolution. So everything that we experience, the internet, social media, all those elements, the question is, are we conceiving curriculum or curricula in Africa? Are we conceiving courses and classes in order to prepare the people who should have the knowledge required in order to become better citizens of African countries or better citizens of the world? That is one question. We can say the same thing about renewable energy. Are we training people to know how to be experts in the field of renewable energy? We talk about oil in Nigeria. Are we training people so that they can control and then master the different jobs related, to the exploitation of oil in Nigeria? I don't think so. Are we training people in Ivory Coast for them to know what needs to be done for the exploitation and the industrialization in the field of cocoa? We are not doing that. I'm going to stop talking about something that is very important that everyone is talking about today. It is artificial intelligence. So that is the future. When I say future, I'm not talking about something that is going to happen in the next 50 years. In the next 10 years, we're going to see like a big boom in the field of research. There will be new jobs created. There will be, so what are the African leaders or those who are in charge of the education system doing? So these are so many things that our people are not doing right. And that's why your show is a very, very important one. for us to be able to engage the conversation. I'm going to stop there, and then I can continue with many other examples.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Nyaka. Before we come back to you, I'd like to introduce our guest in the house. He is Professor Akumbo Makantoni. He is a political analyst as well as a Pan-Africanist. You're in the educational sector. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity for inviting me and for the opportunity to talk to Africans at this particular moment using your TV station.
Thank you immensely. Okay, to quickly unfold, I would like to ask your assessment of the educational system on the African continent.
You see, I have a problem since the idea of education, the introduction of the educational system that we now have in Africa by the Europeans. The particular educational system that we have today is a colonial educational system, an educational system that was instituted for the purpose of actually creating, should I say, white-collar jobs or slave workers, individuals who could work with the master. It was not an educational system that was meant to train the creative thought of an African person. And so it is not an educational system that I should encourage. And I want to say that the instituted educational system which governments have borrowed from the West in Africa and they're actually enforcing in order to see that their communities can evolve will never permit our communities to evolve, because the true purpose of education is not to give an individual a job, because a lot of our educational purposes in Cameroon and in Africa as a whole have one target: to give jobs to the scholars. And that is never the purpose of education, because when you look at education, the word itself, education, taking it from its Latin root, it says educos, and educos actually means to educe, to bring out from within, implying that the true purpose of education is to inspire the learner to become to inspire the learner for self-realization, which implies when you learn, the next issue should be your ability to tap into your potentials and be able to release who you are into the community, and that automatically brings development of the community. But you look at it, since the educational system that we have is framed for the purpose of memorization, to actually strengthen our memories and not to strengthen our thinking capacity, you do not expect any progress in Africa. And I want to say that it is also, I usually call it a crime to subject a people to a system of education which is not working for their self-realization. To an extent, that is an abuse to human rights, because it seems as if the government has made it in a way that education means I must go to a classroom, sit and enforce, in fact, some discipline to learn. But that is not what education is all about. Education that gives you the freedom. Education should bring freedom of the individual.
Yeah, exactly. And you should be able to learn not just in the classroom, but you should be able to learn outside.
Learning is supposed to be a life process, and it has nothing to do with just the classroom. If classrooms are supposed to be the only medium of learning, then that is an abuse to human right. And so I would say that the right of individuals to be educated is very, very important, but to force them to sit in a classroom is an abuse to human right. And that is the Western system that was introduced, because I heard somebody told me once that before the Westerners came to Africa, there was no education in Africa. I'll remind most of them that the first universities in the West
Yes.
were built in the 12th century. And before the 12th century, we had schools in and
In Africa.
in
exactly.
Africa. And in the 12th century also, we had a university in Mali called the University of Timbuktu.
Yes.
That was a learning center. And apart from Mali, are all over Africa. If you go looking at the educational developments that we have in Africa, you realize that it dates back to more than 2500 BC, which implies that education had been enforced in Africa. And so when you measure the progress, the assessment of education that you are asking me to assess from the colonial implemented educational system, I would tell you it has maintained Africa and Africans in a position of underdevelopment. I just heard Dr. Naka asking a question whether the education that we are actually taking right now is carrying Africa towards industrial development and whatsoever development. I want to say that what is happening in Africa right now is the fact that the invasion of Europeans halted the progress and development of Africans, and now they are forced to take what the Westerners want as a system, which is wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Every people needs to be able to develop an indigenous
On
system
their own, like
that permits them to self-realize. And if you notice, the African people are not a destructive people. We have what we call industrialization today is the most destructive system that was ever introduced on earth. Industrialization from the Western perspective is to destroy the environment, but the African man or people of the South do not have that mindset or system of destruction. They do not need to destroy a whole forest in order to build a structure. They don't do that. They have a natural way of actually blending their structures in the midst of the forest. And you say that that is some people you can want to say that is archaic. You might want to say that is based on your Western perspective is not development. But that is where we have a problem. Even if you go look at the structures that used to be implanted in Timbuktu, they used to use mud to, and you have mud, you had grass, and you had not actually dung mixed together to create what we use to plaster the house, and it was solid. Until now it is still solid. The problem is we have abandoned that technology instead of developing it.
Cement
and we are,
in the Western
the
world.
whole idea of cement is actually destroying the whole environment in order to bring out stones to break them.
Yes.
And that is the reason why you see a lot of erosions taking place. That is why you see the cutting down of trees and destruction of mountains and all that. So we create a situation where we do not there's no biodiversity protection. So the educational system that has come to the African man has been one of his greatest problems. So if you ask me if Africa needed what we have today as education, I would tell you no. But we need education. All of Africans need education, and we have a problem in that we have abandoned our educational system, the ancient educational system that our ancestors used to apply, that permitted them to raise structures. I know a lot of people think that the pyramids were found only in Egypt. If you go down from Egypt down to South Africa, you see ancient structures that were raised, and those are some of the things that today people do not understand. I think in the 18th century, some Westerners, when they passed through the Great Zimbabwe Kingdom, they saw the stone city and stone wall, they were like, God, this cannot be done by Africans, because they do not understand where that technology came from. A technology that is so advanced, but to them it was so strange. So to an extent, they concluded that aliens came in and built on it. And that is the same thing,
really intriguing,
where today they are unable to understand how you have pyramids that have been standing for more than 4,000 years in Egypt. The technology cannot be actually multiplied. They do not have the understanding of that kind of technology that was used to develop that particular structure, that those particular pyramids we have today. So you start asking the questions, are we then progressing or we are regressing? There's retrogression that is taking place. If our ancestors,
yeah, I remember some time ago, Kwame Nkrumah, he mentioned that for Africa itself to be independent, or to think as an independent sovereign state, we have to start believing that, no, we are independent.
Thinking about independence is not actually what makes the difference. The thought of independence, I'm not
acting like it.
You see, the fact that we first of all are imposed everything that we need to do in the name of globalization is one of the greatest problems that the African man has.
Yes.
We have not been given the opportunity to pick up on ourselves and become who we are supposed to be. They came in with their foreign systems, they forced it on our people, and they are still forcing it on us, and they are asking us to fit in. In fact, we are struggling to use a round peg to feed in a square hole, and that becomes very difficult. I believe that every group of people that God created have the right to self-realization in their capacity in their different areas. We are supposed to complement one another with technology, not copy technology.
Yes.
And so I think the African people in their learning are supposed to get to the place where through their education they self-realize and bring their educational system to complement, or maybe to complement with the world. Look at what is happening today. If you go to China is a nation, or let's say a people in the east of Africa.
Yes.
And these are not Caucasians, they are Asiatics. These Asiatics, they have a way that they thought that it was necessary for them to become themselves, and they decided to cut themselves off the war even though they were colonized. At a particular moment when they got their so-called independence, they decided to cut out themselves, then send out people to go learn from out, then develop their unique system that was fitting to them, that they thought was their own system, and bam, they merged.
And they're doing well.
And look at how they are. 40 years
after they're excelling every little thing they do.
Seclusion, look at what they have come to. They are now becoming one of the fastest developing people in the world. They are practically becoming one of, in fact, when you want to talk about technology, they have one of the best technologies so far in the world. And if you look at the economic productivity that these guys are producing, they're competing and almost becoming the first economic power in the world. What has caused that? It is not because they took the educational system from the West. No, they decided to develop their indigenous educational system.
But what about the approach made by the West, especially England, for instance, where Africans are expected to come, study, then come back to Africa and implement what they have learned?
Africa is not England, neither is it Europe.
Definitely agree on that.
What comes from Europe, you see, the educational system of Europe is meant for the West.
Yes.
Educational system for Africa is supposed to be for Africans. And so Africa cannot be learning things that concern another civilization in order to develop as a civilized people. The civilization of the West is for the Westerners. That is why if you look at what their educational system puts on the table, they call it human rights, where They say, as a man, I have the right to sexual right to get married to a man if I want, or to have a sexual rapport with a man if I want. That's a taboo to an African man.
Yes,
that's
definitely.
an educational system that is out of order. So if you see a brother, a sister leaves Africa to go learn from Europe, I'm not going to learn anything from Europeans, because it is true that we so far, I'm talking here because I sat down on their systems and I've been learning for years, but
yes,
I came to realize that the whole thing, my whole life, has been to learn something that is not in relation to who I am supposed to be, and that is why I had to let go of this education
and choose to be an African man.
Yes, as a lecturer, to become an African, to educate Africans on Africanism, because to me that is what makes the difference.
Yes.
It is important that we know that mathematics is not a Western knowledge. It is something that was developed in Africa. And that is what makes a difference. Everyday life is calculated, is math. And so we need to get to put in, those are the subjects that should be implemented in our schools.
Yes.
We must get to a place where we understand that is an educational system that covers both the physical and the spiritual person, because man is not just this physical being, body. Man is a spiritual and a physical being, and so in his wholeness he learns. When you are learning and educating your spirit as well as your physical being, what happens is you become more creative, and that is what made the difference. Our ancestors knew this and they learned it. They were very spiritual, and that is why when Westerners came into Africa, I want to quote somebody like there is one UK parliamentarian, English parliamentarian, who came to Africa, and in his time in Africa, going around Africa, he went back to the parliament and he made this statement. He said he has not seen any nation like Africa. There is no beggar. Then he doesn't end there. He says these people have a very strong value system, and he says this value system is coming from an educational system that is backed by their spirituality.
I like the word nation.
Yes,
He
they call
referred
it
to
a
Africa
nation,
as a nation.
He did not call it
A country,
a continent. He
yes,
said a
exactly.
nation. So with that kind of thinking and actual presentation, he came up, he said, if we have to break these people, then we must be able to make, he said it's difficult. Then he told them that for them to break us, they need to make us not to believe in ourselves.
Exactly.
They need to make us to not to see our heroes as important. We have to believe that everything that comes from the West is all that we need. It's important. So that is the particular perspective which the African people had been used for years, centuries. I think that has made we have been in this situation for more than 500 years. Can you imagine when people are being miseducated for 500 years? So the miseducational system that we have copied and we have implemented will never lead us to where we are going to. So the best way to come out of it is to reverse the system. We realize that the Western educational system cannot build an African man.
Yes.
We reverse the system, re-educate ourselves on what it means to be an African. Self-realization is the mother of sciences. When I realize myself, I bring out naturally and I contribute to the development of my community. And you see, this educational system that they brought to us permits us to be in competition with one another. And that system does not help in development. An educational system that helps in complementing is what makes the difference.
Yes, exactly.
I will say this:
I agree
when you
with
take two children and you put in a classroom, then you come give them an exam to write, then you give 1 point marks that are greater than the other, you are not helping them because you are struggling to mold them into a mold. You are trying to fit them in a mold. If you want their individuality to come out, you don't need to put them in a competition. You need to find out what is the strength of each of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And you develop their
on
strength. But an educational system that has been brought for us to compete with one another does not help us in any way. So I think the African people need to go back to the table, withdraw their educational system, and work towards helping bring out the best that is in each one of us, because it is that best that we have that permits our growth and development and economic empowerment.
Exactly.
So let's stop the child's play that we are playing in the name of education.
Exactly. Over to you, Dr. Nyaka. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think can be done to revamp the education on the continent?
You said many good things, but there are a couple of things I want to make sure that we are on the same page. First of all, I was not saying that we should copy. As a Pan-Africanist, somebody who is promoting the Ubuntu philosophy, then of course I am in support of an Afrocentric educational system. That's the first thing I want to say. The second, yes, learning from the African experience. I am, of course, in support of a holistic educational system in Africa. But there is a point where I may differ from Anthony. 2 points, by the way. The first one, if we agree with most of the things that he said, the question is how we get there. The question is how we get there. And I think on that, I said it a little bit in the beginning, and then I think Sharon asked the question. The Chinese are able to do what they do. They did what they did, but because they reached a level of sovereignty. And that is the beginning of everything. When Mao, and then Anthony knows that, is a great professor and a cultured person, when Mao Zedong succeeded with his revolution in 1949, when China, when they expelled, when Chiang Kai-shek lost the war, and then China put together the foundation of its greatness that we know today, then they decided to do things according to the way they see the world. Anthony said it, they sent people to study the European system, because there is no way in this world today we're going to think that, you know what, we need to learn exclusively the African educational system that our forefathers used to do. We can do that. It is important. That is the beginning. That's the first thing to do. But at the same time, because we be immersed, dragged into a world that we do not control for the last 500 years. So we need to know what gives the European the ability and the power to do what they're doing. So it is important for us to learn that. In South Africa, when Nelson Mandela was in prison, and there was a big debate about the Bantu Education Act, and then the Afrikaners wanted people in South Africa to learn Afrikaans. So the black students, they were upset, they were doing strikes, and they were rebelling. And then when the news reached Nelson Mandela in prison, this is what Mandela said. So he asked people to tell the black South African, to accept to learn Afrikaans. And Mandela himself in prison learned Afrikaans. Thabo Mbeki learned that language of the oppressors. And then this is how, when Mandela came out of prison, when he became president, and then I like that story of his assistant, who was an Afrikaner lady. Her name is Zelda Lagrange. And then when Mandela was traveling across the globe, and when he wanted to communicate with her, then he would speak Afrikaans that many Europeans did not understand. And then the rationale of Mandela is that if you want to be able to defeat the oppressor, you need to to study him, his languages, his values, his world system. This is how you want to know how the oppressor thinks, and now you can organize accordingly. So, yes, the Chinese example is a beautiful one. I like it. But at the same time, they reach a level of independence. That's why they can decide to do what they're doing. In Africa, why we cannot do what Anthony is talking about? When you have somebody like Blaise Compaoré, who is in power for 27 years, who is put there by the Europeans, and who makes sure that he gives most of the things he does, most of the things he does is for the European. He's going to allow Monsanto to go to Burkina Faso for people, in order to try and transform, to do the agriculture the way we don't do in Africa. When you have people like him and many others who are going to be there, like somebody like Ufot Boigny, was in power for 33 years, and because he was on the wrong side of history, and because he sided with the European, Ufot Boigny did not want people to know anything about Pan-Africanism, and the beautiful thing that we can learn about the history of the struggles of the African people. So for me, that is the first thing that we need to do. That's why what we are doing is important. Anthony, for you media, Africa Media, Vox Africa, what people are doing in different sectors, we are conquering step by step the different freedoms that we were deprived from, so that we can decide how we can design our educational system in Africa. Then what we need to do, like I said, the first thing is the struggle for the independence. Number two is, and then on this, and Anthony said already many good things, when we have leaders who are in power, and then who think about the regeneration of the African continent, who think about the redemption of Africa and its people, and who think about Pan-Africanism, then what do? Then we have to come and then do a deconstruction of the curriculum. That is the second step. Even before finding money to try and give that to people, that is the second step. To learn, like I said, we want to know about the Back to Africa movement. We want to learn about Ethiopianism. We want to learn about the civil rights movement in the United States. We want to learn about the Black Lives Matter movement. We want to learn about the Haitian Revolution. And we want to learn about the African revolutions in Cameroon, in Egypt, in Algeria, in different parts of Africa. When we do that. And now, the third step, we have to understand the world. That's why I was talking about artificial intelligence. I'm not saying that the African people should lose their soul. As an advocate of Ubuntu, Ubuntu has to be the central part of everything that we do. In Ubuntu, you have a holistic educational system. In Ubuntu, you have an Afrocentric educational system. And then we have to see how we can use what the Europeans are using. In the beginning, the Chinese were copying the Europeans. In the beginning, the Chinese were studying what the Europeans were doing. When they reached a level where they don't need to go and learn what the Europeans are doing, and that they can do that themselves, in the context of the independence of China, then they have been doing what they're doing today. And sometimes when you talk about China, we forget that communism was an ideology that was alien to China, even though the society was based on collectivism, but communism as an ideology, 1948, the 1848, the Communist Manifesto, and later on we have the Russian Revolution, and we have the Chinese Revolution, we have the Cuban Revolution. This communism was going to spread across the globe. And China has not rejected communism, even though they're claiming Confucianism, which is like the foundation of the Chinese society. So the last thing is that if we say, or because we are African, we want to do things according to the African worldview, and then we don't try to adapt ourselves to the evolution of the world. We have missed a couple of revolutions, and I wrote them here because I did not want to forget. We have not done a serious agricultural revolution yet. I'm not saying that we need to destroy the planet, but we need to be able to feed ourselves, to grow food to feed ourselves, and then to try and mechanize agriculture. We have not done that yet the way we should on the continent of Africa. We're still selling our land to the European, who are creating farms and then producing things for us to feed us and for us to become the internal consumers on our own land. The second revolution that we missed, that we have not done properly, is the industrial revolution. We need to be able to catch up in this. There are things that the Europeans have done to 150 years ago. If we do that today, we will be developing a viable, reliable, domestic African market, and we can produce jobs, and we can produce jobs for people with a vision. Number two, the third revolution in which we are, that we are not there. It is the information technology revolution. We need to be able to catch up, because if you don't catch up with all the revolution, we're going to remain the subject of the Europeans in the world, or in the digital world. If we do not catch up, we're going to become digital colonies, like in the metaverse that Zuckerberg is building. The fourth one is the artificial revolution. Everyone is talking about it, how they're doing it. We need to do that, and we need to study that, and then we can even think about things that they're not even thinking about. When we do that, this is how we can step by step, we can get where we need to get. We can be where we want to be. So this is my approach about the revolution of the educational system in Africa. And when we have money, we can encourage girls to go to school. We can put money like in research and science. If we have money, we can give good salaries to teachers, and we can do all the things that come afterwards. But in the beginning, the thing that I've mentioned, this is how I see the revolution in the educational system.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Nyaka. I want to say thank you for the in-depth you gave on that subject matter. I'll say thank you immensely for taking our time to join us on today's edition. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with you, Professor Mark Anthony. What do you think African leaders, the role they can play in order to break the chain regarding educational systems on the continent?
Yeah, actually, before I get to start answering your question, I want to remind our beloved brother, Dr. Naka, that I know that we are used to the world we live in to an extent where we think we are actually advancing. Whatsoever the West is doing right now is dehumanizing humanity. It is not advancing. So we can't take a system that is dehumanizing humans and I'm not learning anything in it. We have been, Dr. Naka said we need to learn to know how. No, we have been learning about them for years. We have Africans that have decided to learn and remain in Europe and in the United States. Many of them, they are there. What have they been learning? Have they not been learning? We need the diaspora to come back home,
yes,
and say, okay, this is what we got from them.
Now you did mention that we have to first start by believing in ourselves.
Yes. The funny thing about this issue is that we are so celebrating failure in the name of success. The world in which we live in has retrograded, has gotten to a place where people prefer animals more than humans. That is no more education. That is not something to learn. We are talking of information technology. I don't see how that will help in any way. A community is not supposed to be complicated. The complications that these guys are struggling to introduce does not make progress. So from the point in which I am talking, I think the doctor is not seen from that perspective. He's looking at the so-called evolution of the world. The world has not been evolving. The world has been retrograding. We have been getting backward. Just to come back to your question again.
Yes. The role of African leaders.
You asked of the role of African leaders
to break the chain.
Towards breaking the chain, where for us to be able to emerge. I'm sure. So if we have to look at the present, like Dr. Naka actually mentioned, you look at the situation in which we find ourselves today. Most of those we have in leadership, which we call presidents and whatsoever in Africa, they are one of the greatest problems Africa have, because they are individuals who learned
over time
the European system, who are struggling to implement the European system in Africa. You see, we are trying to progress, but we have a group of individuals who do not think for the people. Like he too mentioned about the revolution of China using Mao. You realize that he was a leader who decided to think out of the box and thought for his people. So the principles of Confucianism were what guided his path, and he actually established the principles through which the Chinese empire has been built on today. So the question is, how did he get to the place where he became free? Because I heard him talking about the freedom of the Chinese people. The freedom, in quotes. This freedom was not given, it was fought and taken. We do not have leaders in Africa who are independent thinkers, because they have been schooled in a system that permits them to be boxed.
You can equally get ideas from them before now they can implement in their countries.
They
always borrow ideas.
They can't think for themselves. And so you will not expect an individual who is leaving his nation to go give account to a French boy president to think that he has the capacity to initiate a movement that can bring freedom to the people of Cameroon, to the people of Egypt, to the people of China, of Ghana, to the people of Central African Republic or Ivory Coast. No. We will not expect anything from these people. Like I use a sister platform, and I said this and I'll repeat it again. The state in which Africa is today is due to leadership. But the leadership situation is not something that is only supposed to be looked at from the top. Any Cameroonian, any African that you pick right now and put at the top of the nation, they will produce the same results. Why? 500 years of miseducation has placed them where they are. So it is not because you become a leader that you automatically change. No. We need to uneducate Africans. So Africans need to be uneducated, then re-educated. So if there is going to be a change, we need to use any means possible to reinforce the spirit of independence, because these people do not need a physical independence. They need to have a spirit of independence. They need to believe, like we mentioned at the beginning.
Yes.
When you believe in your freedom, I don't need somebody to give me freedom. I am free by nature as an individual.
And definitely you have to fight for it.
And I was created a free being. So I walk my path in that freedom. And that is the way Africans are supposed to be thinking. once you have that kind of consciousness, the next thing is self-realization. And so Africans need to get to that place where they are, in fact, unbrainwashed.
That's a strong word.
Yes, and they need to get to the place where they are in fact, uneducated. Let me put that word so strongly. After uneducation, then you can now start putting in their spirit what makes them unique to themselves. And once you get that kind of understanding of yourself, because it is not based on a nation, it's not based on the entire Africa, it's based on individuals. When the individuals are able to come to realization, then the entire Africa will emerge. So leadership in Africa is a problem of miseducation. So if miseducation is dealt with, African people will change.
Definitely, I must admit I've learned a lot from you.
Yeah.
I'll say thank you for taking our time to join us on today's edition.
It's my pleasure.
I want to equally say thank you, Dr. Nyaka, for joining us on today's edition.
Oh, thank you. No closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you.
Don't worry, we're going to have time, but due to time constraints, we are going to be closing today's edition on our topic of discussion.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's edition of Voice It over your Pan-African channel 4U television. Of course, today we're discussing how effective are educative systems across the African continent. As you get from our multifaceted guests in the house, Dr. Nyaka, as well as Professor Mark Anthony. They serve it to you hot and tasty. Ladies and gentlemen, as you keep watching our transmissions, God bless Africa.
Votre chaîne de télévision panafricaine 4U Télévision, désormais dans vos ménages, via le satellite Eutelsat CSA, position 16 degrés Est, fréquence 12521, symbol rate 30 000, polarité horizontale. Le satellite Amos 15, position 15 degrés Est, fréquence 12333, symbol rate 30 000, polarité verticale. 4U Télévision est également disponible sur les bouquets créés au Link.com, Star Times, sur nos différentes plateformes numériques et sur l'application 4U Media, téléchargeable sur Play Store. En bonus, profitez de la pertinence de nos sujets d'actualité et de l'interactivité de toutes nos émissions. Participez par appel WhatsApp au +237 693 589 668. Sur Skype, 4U TV. 4U Télévision, votre nouvelle chaîne panafricaine qui vous offre une autre vision du monde.